This video is for A-level economics, giving advice for AQA paper 3, and we've already had a video on the 10 marker for 2022. This video is going to be for the 15 marker on 2022. Now, remember, paper 3 has 30 multiple choice, has the 10 mark to what extent, and it has the 15 mark explain question, and that's going to be, as I said before, the focus. Now, you have seen a 15 mark explain question before. You've seen them in paper 1 and you've seen them in paper 2 in those final sections. But this 15 mark is slightly different, and the reason being is because it's a data response. The other ones were not a data response. This one, you have to respond to the data. Now, the next video in this series is going to be on the 25 mark justify, but let's just focus on the 15 mark explain. So this was the question in the 2022 paper. Explain the factors that a commercial aircraft manufacturer, such as Boeing or Airbus, should consider when forecasting the future sales of its aircraft. So just a reminder, forecasting is that prediction about future sales. Now, this is the descriptor for, and I'm just focused on level 3 because level 3 is the top level of response. I'm just going to pick out something that I think is absolutely crucial, and it is showing sound knowledge and understanding of economic terminology, concepts, and principles with few, if any, errors. That is absolutely essential. You need to show the examiner that you're an economics A-level student. Some of these, if you give this question to somebody who knows what forecasting is and give them a case study, they would be able to answer this question. They'd be able to pick out information from the case study and they'd be able to talk about it. But that would be more of a general studies-esque approach. With you, because you've been studying A-level economics for the last 2 years, you need to show to the examiner that you have that sound knowledge and that sound understanding of all possible economic concepts and principles that are referred to or hinted at in the case study. So, this was a question that I was asking my students when they were doing a mock on this paper, and it was, where is the economics? Where is the key terminology? Where are the economic concepts? And diagrams also help with that. Diagrams is AO2 skill, but it's an AO2 skill is absolutely crucial because it also highlights AO1 and it drives AO3, and they are the assessment objectives that you need to achieve in this question. AO1 for your knowledge and understanding, AO2 for your application, and AO3 for your analysis. I know it's an explain question, but the expectation is that you have those chains of argument. So, when you are having a go at this question, think about how to show off that you're an A-level economist. Right, so I've picked out some key information because everything in the case study, it gives you the information. You just need to pick it out. So I've just picked out some key information. So we've got here, the market for commercial aircraft is subject to cyclical fluctuations in demand. So that's clearly going to have an impact. If you can predict these cyclical fluctuations, then that's going to have an impact on your forecasts. Also, over the past decade, there's been a growth in passenger air travel. So demographics, global demographics, how has it changed? Because that's going to have an impact on your forecasts. So for example, the middle class population increasing from 3.9 billion to 5.9 billion. We've got the development of new, more efficient aircrafts, which is encouraging the airlines to replace older airplanes. So we've got some companies that are buying the Airbus A321XLR, which has 30% lower fuel consumption, which therefore can obviously give you a competitive advantage if you choose to buy that aircraft. We've got international trade in terms of air cargo, and just in terms of the transport via air. A lot of these points all link to derived demand, and derived demand, for the students who did well in this 15 marker, they highlighted derived demand. And it is a perfect diagram that you could also be using, and you can use it for a couple of the points, but you don't need to. You just need to draw it once and then kind of refer to it in your other points. So what we've got is the demand for air cargo or the demand for airline tickets. Sorry, I know it's cropped out a little bit there, but yeah, demand for air cargo or demand for airline tickets. It depends on how you want to sell this argument. And you can just see it's just a simple demand shift to the right. That's all it is. But then do it as a side-by-side diagram and show, okay, well, how does that impact demand for aircrafts? Well, if there's a growth in international trade, there's going to be higher demand for air cargo. If there's higher demand for air cargo, there's probably going to mean that you need demand for capital, the capital being the aircrafts. If there's an increase in middle income demographics and there's a rise in average income, then again, what we'll see is more demand for airline tickets, and therefore, because there's more demand for airline tickets, again, they need the capital, therefore they need the aircrafts. So that derived demand, those two diagrams would have been absolutely perfect for this question. Also, what we've got is, again, think about income elasticity demand. If we're thinking about it in terms of YED and thinking about, okay, there's an increase in average income, which is causing an increase in demand, therefore this will be a normal good. And if it's obviously more than unitary, then it's going to be a normal luxury good. So what we'll see is we'll see a rise in income from Y1 to Y2 and an increase in demand from Q1 to Q2. And that would be another diagram that you could have used. We've also got it in terms of, and this was actually in an extract which followed on from the extract which it's kind of sometimes instructing you towards, but this is another ideal one because it's talking about how actually the market is becoming more contestable and there's subsidised and state-owned companies being more and more competitive, such as the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China. So again, you can think about XED. So if we've got subsidised supply from China, so we see an increase in supply of these aircrafts from supply to supply one, then what that's going to mean is obviously the price of these aircrafts are going to be cheaper, which is going to make them more competitive. And what we might see is a fall in demand for the likes of Boeing and for Airbus. So if Boeing and Airbus are realizing that these companies from, for example, China are being heavily subsidized and therefore being much cheaper to buy, and we're going to see a growing competition, then Boeing and Airbus might start to forecast a fall in their sales. And these are some of the diagrams that you could have been drawing. You didn't have to draw them all, but it's just to give you a bit of an example of what you could have drawn. But these points, they are so, the case study is designed in such a way to make them really obvious, but you just need to be able to pick them out. Don't overcomplicate it. The students who didn't do very well in this question picked points which were just not really relevant. They made it harder for themselves by just picking out a point from maybe one word or from a previous extract. So I know that some students were drawing like kink demand curves, which is just, it's not relevant. There's, especially when we can see that contestability has grown anyway. So we just need to consider that as well. So what we are going to look at, and again, refer to XED, refer to substitute goods, think about, again, showing that sound knowledge and sound understanding. Right, so this is my first point. There's been a growth in passenger air travel averaged at 6.5% per annum. Over the next 20 years, the middle class population is expected to rise from 3.9 billion to 5.9 billion, adding to the growth in air travel. As flights can be considered a normal luxury good, it has a positive income elasticity demand, meaning as income rises, as does the quantity demanded. As global average incomes rise from Y1 to Y2, and a greater demographic being considered middle income, then there'll be an expected rise for airlines from Q1 to Q2 as the diagram above shows. Once again, as it is derived demand, we would expect aircraft manufacturers to forecast higher sales, as the diagram highlights a demand shift for airlines will cause a similar shift for aircrafts, both increasing quantity sold. Now that's a pretty significant point, and there's kind of 2 points there. There's a growth in air travel, but there's also the middle class population. Now my recommendation to students is to do 3 issues. So technically what I've done is I've done 2 paragraphs, and I've actually drawn like 3 diagrams here. But there is 2 issues there. There's the growth in passenger air travel, and there's also the growth in middle class population. But I do want to bring in a 3rd issue as well. So what I've done is I've gone for another one, and there was others that you could pick, but I've just gone for finally, as it becomes more noticeable that older aircrafts are inefficient and need replacing, there will be growing demand for newly developed and more fuel efficient aircrafts. Aircraft such as the Airbus, as I mentioned before, has 30% lower fuel consumption per seat. Sorry, that's meant to say per seat, compared with previous generation competitor airplanes. Therefore, not only do they comply with regulation, but at the same time reduce average costs and provide airlines with a competitive advantage. Ultimately, Airbus will forecast higher demand for such an aircraft. And that would be my my final point. So for your 3 issues, I would recommend at least one diagram. I wouldn't really expect a student to write a 15 marker without drawing at least one diagram, but the diagram has to be relevant. Do not draw a diagram because you feel like you have to draw a diagram. The diagrams should really lend itself to the points that are being mentioned in the case study. So, and also don't rule out just some of the simple diagrams that maybe you did at the beginning of year 12, maybe simple supply and demand, maybe look at the interrelationship between markets. They're absolutely fine, but it clearly depends what the question is. But you can draw diagrams from year 12 to year 13 as long as they're relevant. Do not pick the more complex diagrams that maybe you've been doing recently thinking, oh, I can try and fit them in because they'll be more impressive. They won't be impressive if they do not answer the question and they are not relevant. If that's the case, you will not get into level 3.